She sat as Feist at his dinner table, wine glass in hand, and asked the one question designed to destroy everything. "So, is she just your roommate?" Ryan Carter felt his chest tighten. Across from him, Victoria Hale, the woman who had walked into his apartment as a stranger and somehow become the center of his universe, went completely still. His ex-girlfriend Sabrina smiled, waiting for the lie to collapse. But what happened next changed every single person in that room forever. If you want to hear how a quiet single father and a CEO running from her own life accidentally fell into the most unexpected love story, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I can see just how far this story has traveled. Ryan Carter hated mornings that started before the coffee finished brewing. It was a Monday in early October, and the rain had been hammering Portland for 3 straight days without letting up. Not the gentle, cinematic rain people imagined when they thought about the Pacific Northwest. This was the ugly kind, cold, relentless, turning every sidewalk into a shallow river and making the 6-block walk to Maple Lane Elementary feel like a survival exercise. "Daddy, my shoe is wet." Lily stood in the hallway with one pink sneaker on and the other held out in front of her like evidence in a courtroom. Water dripped from the sole onto the hardwood floor. She was 6 years old, serious-faced, with dark hair that Ryan had attempted to braid that morning using a YouTube tutorial he'd watched at 5:47 a.m. The braid looked like something that had survived a windstorm. "Which shoe?" he asked, even though she was literally showing him. "This one." She shook it for emphasis. More water hit the floor. Ryan crouched down and took the sneaker from her. The sole had a crack along the bottom. Not huge, but enough to let water in. He pressed his thumb against it and sighed. These were the shoes he'd bought 3 weeks ago, $29 at Target. They were supposed to last at least until December. "Okay," he said. "Give me 30 seconds. He went to the kitchen, pulled a gallon-sized plastic bag from the drawer, and wrapped it around the inside of the shoe. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't even particularly effective. But it would keep her sock dry for the walk to school, and that was the entire goal of his morning. Get Lily to school with dry socks, a full stomach, and something resembling a normal hairstyle. "There," he handed the shoe back. "Waterproof." Lily examined it skeptically. "That's a sandwich bag." "It's a waterproofing system." "It's a sandwich bag, Daddy." "Put your shoe on, Lily." She put her shoe on. They made it to school 12 minutes late, which was actually an improvement from last Friday. Ryan signed the late sheet at the front office without making eye contact with Mrs. Patterson, the attendance secretary, who had started giving him a look somewhere between pity and disapproval. He knelt down in the hallway outside Lily's classroom and straightened her jacket. "You good?" he asked. "I'm good." She paused. "Is the bag going to make a sound when I walk?" "Probably." "Great." She said it flatly, the way only a 6-year-old who had inherited her father's dry humor could. He kissed the top of her head and watched her disappear through the classroom door. Then he stood there for an extra second, the way he always did, making sure the door closed all the way, and that he could hear the teacher's voice welcoming her inside. He didn't know why he did that. Maybe because 2 years ago, when Sabrina had walked out and left him with a 4-year-old in a half-empty apartment, the only thing that had kept him upright was the knowledge that Lily still needed him to be functional. Functional. That was the word he used in his own head. Not happy, not thriving, functional. Ryan walked back through the rain to the bus stop, caught the 14 downtown, and was at his desk at Morrison and Webb Structural Engineering by 8:40. His cubicle was the second one from the window, close enough to see the rain but not close enough to feel any warmth from the glass. He hung his wet jacket on the back of his chair and opened his laptop. 47 unread emails, a revised load calculation for the Hawthorne Bridge retrofit, a passive-aggressive message from his project lead about deadline expectations, a reminder from the building management company that his apartment's lease renewal was due by the end of the month. He started with the load calculation because it was the only thing that wouldn't make him feel something. Numbers were safe, numbers didn't leave, numbers didn't look at you across a kitchen table and say, "I just think I need more than this, Ryan." Numbers behaved exactly the way you expected them to, and if they didn't, you could fix them with a pencil and a calculator. He worked through lunch, a granola bar from the vending machine. black coffee from the break room that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration. At 3:15, he saved his files, closed his laptop, and caught the bus back to pick up Lily. This was his life. It had been his life for 2 years. Wake up, improvise breakfast, get Lily to school, work, pick up Lily, make dinner, bath time, bedtime stories, collapse on the couch, with a beer he didn't finish because he fell asleep before the second sip. Repeat, every single day. Weekends were the same thing, minus the bus ride. He wasn't miserable. He wanted to be clear about that, even to himself. He wasn't some tragic figure in a movie, staring out rain-soaked windows and listening to sad music. He loved Lily. He was good at his job. He paid his rent on time, usually. He had friends, technically, though most of them had drifted into that awkward zone where they texted him once a month and said, "We should grab a beer sometime," and neither party ever followed through. He was just static, like a machine running at exactly the RPMs necessary to avoid shutting down, and he had made peace with that. Or at least he had convinced himself that peace and resignation were close enough to be interchangeable. The apartment was a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building on Southeast Belmont Street. The hallway smelled like someone else's cooking, always someone else's cooking, and the elevator had been broken since July. The spare bedroom had been empty since Sabrina left. Ryan used it as a storage room now, which meant it contained 3 boxes of engineering textbooks, a broken vacuum cleaner, and a child's bicycle that Lily had outgrown 6 months ago, but that he kept forgetting to donate. He got the email from his landlord on a Wednesday evening. Lily was in the bathtub, making a walrus out of soap bubbles, and Ryan was sitting on the closed toilet lid scrolling through his phone when the notification popped up. "Dear Mr. Carter, we are pleased to inform you that your application to lease the spare bedroom in Unit 3B has been approved for a short-term tenant. The tenant, Ms. Victoria Hale, will be occupying the room for approximately 8 to 12 weeks beginning November 1st. Please ensure the room is cleared and available by October 28th. Regards, Belmont Property Management." Ryan stared at the screen. He had completely forgotten. 3 months ago, when the rent increase had hit, and his budget had gotten tight enough to make him lose sleep, he'd mentioned to his landlord that he was open to subletting the spare room. It had seemed like a reasonable idea at the time. Extra income, shared utilities, someone else's name on half the electric bill. He'd filled out the paperwork, agreed to the terms, and then promptly buried the entire thing under the avalanche of daily life. Now it was happening. "Daddy, look, the walrus has a baby." Ryan looked at the bathtub. Lily had fashioned a smaller soap bubble creature next to the first one. It looked nothing like a walrus or a baby, but he nodded seriously. "Very impressive." "Thank you." She dunked both of them. He read the email again. Victoria Hale. He didn't know the name. Short-term tenant, 8 to 12 weeks. That was manageable. That was basically just having a very quiet, very temporary house guest who paid rent. He could do this. Probably. He spent the next 5 days clearing out the spare room, which turned out to be a significantly larger project than he'd anticipated. The engineering textbooks went into his bedroom closet. The broken vacuum went to the dumpster. The bicycle went to the Goodwill drop-off on Hawthorne, and Lily cried for 20 minutes because she had apparently formed an emotional attachment to a bicycle she hadn't ridden since she was 4. "It's too small for you," Ryan said. "I know, but I still love it." You can love something and still let it go. He said it to his daughter, but he heard himself say it, and something about the words landed differently than he'd intended. He moved on. By October 28th, the spare room was clean. Not impressive. The walls were still the same off-white they'd been since 2019, and the single window looked out onto the brick wall of the building next door. But clean. He'd even bought a small desk lamp from the hardware store down the street, because the overhead light flickered, and he didn't want his new tenant's first impression to be that she was moving into a horror movie. Victoria Hale arrived on November 1st at exactly 6 p.m. Ryan was not prepared. He had expected, and he would later admit this was based on nothing but his own assumptions, someone casual, someone who matched the slightly weathered vibe of the building, a grad student, maybe, or a freelancer between apartments. Someone who would show up with a duffel bag and a laptop and be easy to ignore. Victoria Hale was none of those things. She stood in his doorway wearing a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that looked effortless but absolutely was not. She carried a leather weekend bag in one hand and a phone in the other, and she was already in the middle of a conversation when he opened the door. Tell Marcus that the vendor timeline is non-negotiable. If they can't deliver the prototypes by the 14th, we go with Seoul. I don't care what he thinks about the shipping costs. That's his problem to solve, not mine. I'll call you in an hour. She ended the call, looked at Ryan, and extended her hand. Victoria Hale, I'm your new tenant. Ryan. He shook her hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike. Carter. Ryan Carter. She looked past him into the apartment. He watched her eyes move across the living room. The sagging couch, the toys scattered near the coffee table, the crayon drawing taped to the refrigerator that Lily had made last Tuesday. And he saw something shift in her expression. Not quite disappointment, more like recalibration. It's cozy, she said. It's small, he corrected. She almost smiled. Small and cozy aren't mutually exclusive. They are when you're paying Portland rent. This time she did smile, briefly, and then it was gone. Can I see the room? He led her down the hallway. The apartment felt even smaller with another adult in it. The hallway was narrow enough that they had to walk single file, and he was suddenly, painfully aware of the laundry basket he'd left outside the bathroom door. A pair of Lily's cartoon print socks sat on top like a flag of surrender. The spare room looked exactly as adequate as it was. Victoria walked in, set her bag on the bed, and looked around with the same expression she'd used on the living room. Evaluating, processing, filing everything away behind a face that gave almost nothing back. This will work, she said. Thank you. There's coffee in the kitchen, and the Wi-Fi password is on the fridge. Perfect. That was the entirety of their first conversation. Ryan went back to the kitchen and started making dinner, pasta with jarred sauce, because it was a Wednesday, and Wednesdays were for surviving, not cooking. Lily was on the living room floor with her coloring books, completely unaware that a stranger had just moved into their home. Lily, he said, come here for a second. She appeared in the kitchen doorway. What? We have a new roommate. Her name is Victoria. She's going to be staying in the extra room for a little while. Lily considered this. Is she nice? I don't know yet. She just got here. Does she like coloring? I don't know that either. Can I ask her? Maybe tomorrow. Let's give her some space tonight. Lily nodded, accepting this the way children accept most things adults tell them, with the understanding that the adult's reasoning is probably wrong, but not worth arguing about. Victoria stayed in her room for the rest of the evening. Ryan heard her on the phone twice, brief, clipped conversations in the same efficient tone she'd used at the door. At one point, he heard her laugh, and it surprised him. It was a different sound from her speaking voice, warmer, less controlled. He fell asleep on the couch at 10:15, half a beer still on the coffee table. The first week was awkward in the way that living with a stranger is always awkward. They developed an unspoken schedule. Victoria was up by 5:30, showered and dressed and out the door before Ryan and Lily even started their morning chaos. She came home late, usually after 8 o'clock, and went directly to her room. They communicated primarily through brief exchanges in the kitchen, the kind of conversations that involved saying, "Excuse me," when reaching for the same cabinet, and "sorry" when someone left a mug in the sink. Ryan learned things about her in pieces. The leather bag was from a company called Toomey. She drank her coffee black, no sugar, and she made it strong enough to dissolve metal. She took calls at all hours and spoke to people named Marcus, Priya, and someone she referred to only as the board, with a tone that suggested the board was a living entity she had to constantly wrestle into submission. He learned she was the CEO of a company called Hale and Gray Design, which was apparently expanding from its San Francisco headquarters into a Portland office. He learned this not because she told him, but because he Googled her after the third night of overhearing phrases like Q4 projections and market positioning and tell legal to stop dragging their feet. The search results were intimidating. Victoria Hale, 30, co-founder and CEO. Featured in Fast Company, Architectural Digest, a Portland Business Journal profile with a photo of her standing in front of a glass-walled office looking like someone who had never in her life put a sandwich bag inside a child's shoe. Ryan closed the browser and felt a small, irrational flare of embarrassment about his own life. He pushed it down. He was good at pushing things down. Lily, predictably, broke through the awkwardness before anyone else did. It happened on the second Saturday. Ryan was in the kitchen making pancakes, his one reliable breakfast achievement, when Lily wandered out of her room carrying a drawing she'd made the night before. It was a purple house with a yellow sun and 3 stick figures in the yard. She walked straight past Ryan, down the hallway, and knocked on Victoria's door. Ryan turned from the stove. "Lily, wait." The door opened. Victoria appeared in leggings and an oversized sweater, her hair down, no makeup. She looked startlingly different from the polished CEO version. Younger, softer, slightly confused about why a 6-year-old was standing outside her door at 8 a.m. on a Saturday. "Hi," Lily said. "I made you something." She held up the drawing. Victoria looked at it, then looked at Lily, and something in her expression cracked open. Just a little, just for a second. She crouched down to Lily's level. "Is that a house?" she asked. "It's our house. That's Daddy." Lily pointed to the tallest stick figure. "That's me." The smallest one, with what appeared to be wings. "And that's you." Victoria looked at the drawing for a long time, longer than seemed normal. When she looked up, her eyes were bright, and Ryan, watching from the kitchen, felt something shift in the air between all 3 of them. "Thank you," Victoria said. "This is the best thing anyone has given me in a long time." "You're welcome. Do you want pancakes? Daddy makes good ones." Victoria glanced down the hall at Ryan. He stood there with a spatula in one hand and a look on his face that said, "I swear I didn't put her up to this." "I'd love pancakes," Victoria said. They sat at the kitchen table together for the first time. Lily talked non-stop. About school. About her best friend Mara. About the caterpillar their class was raising that she was convinced was going to become a butterfly any day now. Victoria listened with a focus that surprised Ryan. She asked follow-up questions, real ones, not the polite, distracted kind that adults usually offered children. "What's the caterpillar's name?" Victoria asked. "Gerald." "Strong name." "I picked it." "Of course you did." Ryan watched them from across the table, and something he hadn't expected started happening inside his chest. It wasn't attraction. Not yet. It was recognition. The feeling of seeing someone drop their armor and realizing the person underneath was completely different from the one they showed the world. He poured Victoria more coffee and didn't say anything about it. After that morning, the boundaries softened. Not dramatically. Victoria was still out early and home late most days. But the silences between them became comfortable instead of strained. She started leaving her door open in the evenings. Ryan started making enough dinner for 3 without asking if she'd be home. Sometimes she was. Sometimes she wasn't. But the plate was always there. They talked more. Short conversations at first, about the building, the weather, the restaurant down the street that Ryan swore had the best pho in Portland, and Victoria was skeptical about because she'd had pho in San Francisco, and apparently that was the gold standard. "It's not a competition," he said. "Everything is a competition," she said. "That's literally how markets work. We're talking about soup. Soup is a market." He laughed. She looked surprised that she'd made him laugh, and then she looked pleased, and then she looked away before the pleased expression could settle on her face too comfortably. One Thursday evening in late November, Ryan came home from picking up Lily to find Victoria sitting on the couch with her laptop closed on the cushion beside her. She wasn't working. She wasn't on the phone. She was just sitting there, staring at the wall opposite the couch, which featured nothing more interesting than a framed photo of Lily at the beach and a small crack in the plaster that Ryan kept meaning to patch. "Hey," he said. "You okay?" She didn't answer immediately. Lily ran past them to her room, already talking about the drawing she was going to make before dinner. The apartment door clicked shut, and in the sudden quiet, Ryan noticed Victoria's hands were clenched in her lap. "Victoria?" She looked at him. Her composure was still intact. The posture, the even expression, the careful way she held herself. But something behind her eyes was shaking. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to hear the whole thing before you say no." Ryan sat down on the other end of the couch. Okay. She took a breath, then another. She was a woman who ran boardroom meetings and negotiated million-dollar contracts, and she was struggling to get a sentence out in a living room that smelled like a 6-year-old's strawberry shampoo. My parents are coming to Portland, she said. Okay. Next weekend. Okay. I told them I'm in a relationship. Ryan waited. I'm not in a relationship, she said. He waited longer. I told them I've been seeing someone serious for 6 months. A man. Someone stable and grounded and… She stopped. Her jaw tightened. I lied, Ryan. I've been lying to them for 6 months because every time I call home, my mother asks me when I'm getting married. And my father tells me that no amount of professional success will make up for the fact that I'm 30 years old and alone. And I cracked. One night, 3 glasses of wine, and I told them I was seeing someone. And then they kept asking questions, and I kept answering them. And now they've booked flights and a hotel, and they're coming here to meet a man who doesn't exist. The silence that followed was so complete that Ryan could hear the rain against the window, and Lily humming in her room, and the refrigerator buzzing its low, persistent hum. You want me to pretend to be your boyfriend, he said. It wasn't a question. Victoria's face did something complicated, a mixture of shame, relief that he'd understood without her having to say it, and a defensive tightness that suggested she was already preparing for rejection. One weekend, she said. Friday dinner, Saturday brunch, maybe one more meal. You meet them, we act like a couple, they leave happy, and I buy myself another 6 months to figure out how to untangle this mess. Why me? Because you're here. Because they already know I live in this apartment. Because if I hire someone or ask a friend, there's a chance it gets messy or someone talks or… She stopped again. Because you're the most honest person I've ever met, and I'm asking you to lie. I know how that sounds. I know it's unfair, but I don't have anyone else to ask. Ryan looked at her. This woman who arrived at his door 6 weeks ago in a coat that cost more than his couch, who ran a company and spoke to boardrooms and never seemed to need anything from anyone, was sitting in his living room asking him for help the way a person asks when they've run out of every other option. He thought about saying no. It would have been reasonable. It would have been smart. He barely knew her. The whole plan was built on deception, and Ryan had spent the last 2 years trying to build a life based on things that were simple and true. But he also thought about the way she'd looked at Lily's drawing, the way she'd crouched down to a 6-year-old's level and said, "This is the best thing anyone has given me in a long time." And the way her voice sounded right now, not like a CEO, not like a woman in control, but like someone who was genuinely, desperately afraid of disappointing the people she loved. "One weekend," he said. Victoria blinked. "Really?" "One weekend. But we do this right. If your parents are going to believe it, we need to know each other's stories, all of it, not the surface stuff. I can prepare a briefing." "Not a briefing, Victoria. A conversation. You tell me about your life, I tell you about mine, and we figure out how two people who actually care about each other would act. Because that's what they're going to be looking for. Not a performance, something real." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her recalculating, adjusting the model she'd built of him in her head, the quiet engineer, the single dad, the man who wrapped sandwich bags around his daughter's shoes. He was more than that. She was starting to see it. "Okay," she said quietly. "When do we start?" "After dinner. Lily goes to bed at 8. Victoria nodded. "Thank you, Ryan." "Don't thank me yet. You haven't tasted my meatloaf." She laughed, that same warm, unguarded laugh he'd heard through the wall weeks ago. And for the first time since she'd moved in, it felt like they were sharing the same room instead of occupying separate corners of it. That night, after Lily was asleep, they sat at the kitchen table with mugs of coffee and began the strange, uncomfortable process of learning each other. Victoria went first. She talked about growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut. Her father, Richard Hale, ran an investment firm. Her mother, Catherine, was a former interior designer who had given up her career when she married and spent the next 30 years managing charity boards and social calendars. Victoria had one older brother, Andrew, who had done everything their parents expected. Married at 27, 2 children by 30, partner at a law firm in Manhattan. He was the golden child. Victoria was the project. They love me, she said, and the way she said it made it sound like a condition rather than a comfort. But they love me inside a very specific framework. Be successful, but not so successful that it becomes your whole identity. Be independent, but not so independent that you don't need a man. Be ambitious, but make sure ambition leads to a wedding and a house in the suburbs and grandchildren they can show off at the country club. And you started a company instead. I started a company in San Francisco, 3,000 miles from Greenwich. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. They were proud. They are proud. But there's always this undercurrent, this sense that everything I've built is incomplete until there's a ring on my finger and a nursery in my house. Ryan was quiet for a moment. My parents weren't like that. What were they like? My dad was an electrician. My mom worked the front desk at a dentist's office in Beaverton. They got married young, had me, and spent the next 25 years trying to make sure I had a better shot than they did. College fund, tutoring, the whole thing. He paused. They died in a car accident when I was 24, 3 months apart. Dad first, then Mom. Victoria set down her mug. Ryan, it was a long time ago. It wasn't, not really, but he'd learned that saying it made other people more comfortable, and he was tired of watching people struggle with what to say next. The point is, they would have been happy if I was a garbage collector, as long as I was okay. Your parents sound like they love you through a checklist. He said it gently, without judgment, but Victoria flinched anyway. Not because it was cruel, because it was accurate. They do, she admitted. And I've spent my entire adult life either trying to meet the checklist or pretending I don't care about it. Honestly, I don't know which one exhausts me more. Probably the pretending. She looked at him. Yeah, probably. They moved on. Ryan told her about Sabrina. Not everything, but enough. They'd been together for 4 years. Sabrina was beautiful, ambitious, restless. She wanted a life that moved fast and looked good from the outside. Ryan had tried to be the man she wanted. More social, more driven, more willing to treat life like a competition. It didn't work. People can stretch, but they can't become someone else. She left when Lily was 4, he said. Said she loved me but wasn't in love with me. Said I was a good man but not the right man. Said a lot of things that sounded compassionate but felt like being told I wasn't enough in the nicest possible way. Were you enough? For Lily, yeah. For myself, most days. For Sabrina? He shrugged. I don't think that was ever the right question. She didn't want what I was. She wanted what I could become, and I never became it. Victoria studied him across the table. You don't seem bitter. I'm not bitter. I'm tired. There's a difference. Is there? Bitter means you're still fighting it. Tired means you've stopped. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and something softer. And then she asked, What do you want, Ryan? Not for Lily. For yourself. Nobody had asked him that question in 2 years. He turned his coffee mug in his hands and thought about it honestly. I want to stop feeling like I'm waiting for something without knowing what it is. The words hung in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. Rain tapped the window. Victoria nodded slowly. I know exactly what that feels like. They talked for 3 more hours that night. He learned that her favorite food was her grandmother's braised short ribs, which she hadn't had since the grandmother died 7 years ago. She learned that he had once wanted to be an architect, but settled for structural engineering because it paid better, and he had a baby on the way. She told him about the panic attack she'd had in her office bathroom 6 months ago, the one that lasted 20 minutes and left her sitting on the tile floor with her heels off and her hands shaking. He told her about the night after Sabrina left when he'd sat in the dark living room holding sleeping Lily and cried for an hour straight without making a sound because he didn't want to wake her up. They traded these things like cards in a game neither of them fully understood the rules of. And somewhere in the middle of it, maybe around midnight, maybe later, the project stopped being about pretending. It became something else. 2 people who had spent years building walls were suddenly standing in each other's rooms, looking at the foundations, understanding for the first time that loneliness has the same architecture no matter how different the buildings look from the outside. We should practice, Victoria said at one point. Practice what? Being a couple. The way we stand together. How close. Whether we touch. Ryan felt his pulse do something unexpected. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Not tonight, she added quickly. I'm just saying, we should think about it. I'm thinking about it. She looked at him. He looked at her. And something passed between them that neither of them acknowledged. Not yet, not out loud, but that both of them felt in the quiet, charged space between the coffee mugs and the kitchen light. Victoria stood up. I should get some sleep. Early morning. Always an early morning. Story of my life. She paused at the hallway entrance. Ryan? Yeah? Thank you for not making me feel stupid for asking. You're not stupid, Victoria. You're stuck. Everybody gets stuck. She nodded once, turned, and walked down the hallway. Her door closed softly, and Ryan sat at the table for another 10 minutes, listening to the rain and wondering what exactly he had agreed to. Over the next week, they prepared. It was strange, deliberate and intimate at the same time, like rehearsing for a play where the script was their actual lives. Every evening after Lily went to bed, they sat on the couch or at the table and walked through the details. How did we meet? Victoria asked on Tuesday. The truth? You moved in. We started talking. That's not romantic. It doesn't have to be romantic. It has to be believable. People meet in boring ways all the time. She conceded the point. They agreed on a version. Victoria had moved into the building, they'd run into each other in the hallway, started talking, found they had more in common than expected. A slow build, no lightning bolt. Just two people gradually becoming important to each other, which Ryan realized with an uncomfortable jolt was basically what had already happened. Wednesday, they worked on physicality. This was harder. Victoria sat next to him on the couch, their knees not quite touching, and they talked about how couples who'd been together 6 months would behave. Casual contact, she said. Hand on the arm, sitting close, nothing performative. I know how relationships work, Victoria. I know you know. I'm just... She exhaled. I'm nervous. About the touching? About all of it. My parents are going to be watching everything. My mother notices when my napkin is folded wrong. She's going to notice if we seem uncomfortable together. Ryan shifted slightly closer to her on the couch. Their shoulders touched. Victoria went rigid for half a second, then relaxed. See? He said. Not terrible. I didn't say it was terrible. Your entire body said it was terrible. My body is a liar. He laughed. She laughed. And for a moment, the nervousness dissolved into something easier, something that felt less like preparation and more like the thing they were pretending to be. On Thursday, they had their first real argument. It started because Victoria suggested buying Ryan a new shirt for the dinner with her parents. She said it casually, the way she might suggest a restaurant. But Ryan heard something else in it. What's wrong with my shirts? Nothing. I just thought, you thought I'd look too much like a structural engineer and not enough like someone a CEO would date. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. Victoria's eyes narrowed. I'm trying to make this convincing, Ryan. My parents are going to walk in here and see a man who wears flannel shirts with the sleeves rolled up and has a daughter's crayon drawing on the fridge, and they're going to need to believe that I chose that life, deliberately. And you're worried they won't? I'm worried they'll think I settled. The word hit the room like a brick through glass. Victoria closed her eyes. I didn't mean it like that. Yeah, you did. He wasn't angry. His voice was flat, tired. The same tone Sabrina had heard 100 times. Back when she used to push him toward ambition he didn't want, and he would absorb it instead of pushing back. You meant that your parents measure people in a certain way, and by that measurement I come up short. That's fine. That's why this is pretend. Ryan, wear what makes you comfortable. Tell me what you need me to say. I'll play the part. He got up and went to the kitchen. Victoria sat on the couch and pressed her fingers against her forehead and cursed herself silently for being exactly the kind of person she hated, someone who measured people by their packaging instead of their substance. She found him 20 minutes later washing dishes that were already clean. I'm sorry, she said. You were right. I was being my mother. You don't have to. Yes, I do. She stepped closer. I don't think you came up short. I think the opposite, actually. I think my parents are going to walk in here and see exactly the kind of man I've never been brave enough to choose, and that scares me more than the lie does. Ryan turned off the faucet. Water dripped from his hands into the sink. That's the most honest thing you've said since you moved in, he said. I know. Felt good? Felt terrible. He handed her a dish towel. Yeah, honesty usually does. She dried the dish he gave her. They stood side by side at the sink, not speaking, and the silence was different from all the silences that had come before. It was the silence of two people who had just shown each other something real and hadn't looked away. Friday came. Victoria's parents were arriving the next morning. The apartment was clean, actually clean, not Ryan clean, and there was a bottle of wine on the counter that Victoria had bought from a shop on Division Street. Lily had been told that Victoria's parents were coming to visit and that it was important to be polite, which Lily interpreted as an instruction to show them every drawing she'd ever made. Ryan stood in his bedroom that evening, looking at himself in the mirror on the back of the door. He was wearing a navy button-down shirt, his own, not one Victoria had bought, and dark jeans. He looked fine. He looked like himself, and he realized, standing there, that the question he should have been asking all along wasn't whether Victoria's parents would believe he was her boyfriend. The question was whether he still believed this was pretend. Because somewhere in the last 3 weeks, between the pancakes and the arguments and the midnight conversations and the weight of Victoria's shoulder against his on the couch, something had changed. He wasn't just helping a roommate out of a jam anymore. He was memorizing the details of her life because he wanted to know them. He was noticing the way she rubbed her neck when she was stressed, and the way she always paused at Lily's bedroom door on her way to the kitchen in the morning, and the way her whole face softened when she forgot to control it. He was falling, slowly, clumsily, without permission or planning, the way a building settles into its foundation, not all at once, but in gradual, irreversible increments. And he had no idea if she felt the same way. He buttoned the last button on his shirt, looked at himself one more time in the mirror, a tired single father in a small apartment, getting ready to pretend he was enough for a woman who ran the world. The rain had stopped. The apartment was quiet. Tomorrow the performance would begin. And Ryan Carter, who had spent 2 years convincing himself that he had no room left for complicated feelings, was about to discover just how wrong a man could be. Victoria's parents arrived at Portland International Airport at 11:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning, 14 minutes ahead of schedule, because Richard Hale had never been late to anything in his life and considered punctuality a moral achievement. Ryan knew this because Victoria had told him. She'd told him a lot of things about her parents over the past week. Their preferences, their habits, the invisible rules they carried around like luggage. Her father drank scotch, never bourbon. Her mother would compliment the apartment regardless of what she actually thought about it, but the speed of the compliment was inversely proportional to her sincerity. The faster she said, "How lovely," the less she meant it. They both valued eye contact. They both despised people who checked their phones during meals. And they had, according to Victoria, an almost supernatural ability to detect dishonesty. "They're going to know," Victoria said that morning, pacing the living room in a silk blouse and tailored pants, her hair down, her composure hanging by a thread. "They're going to walk through that door and take one look at us and know." Know what? That we're lying. We've been preparing for 2 weeks. My mother once figured out that my brother's wife was pregnant before my brother did, based on how she held her fork at dinner. These are not normal people, Ryan. Ryan was sitting on the couch, tying Lily's shoes. Lily was wearing a blue dress she'd picked out herself and a headband with a small plastic butterfly on it that she'd found in the bottom of her drawer and declared essential. "Daddy, is Victoria's mommy and daddy nice?" Lily asked. "I'm sure they are," Ryan said, though he wasn't sure at all. "Are they going to like my drawings?" "Everyone likes your drawings." "Not Mrs. Patterson. She said my horse looked like a dog." "Mrs. Patterson has questionable taste." "What does that mean?" "It means your horse was fine." Victoria stopped pacing and looked at them. Ryan on the couch, calmly tying shoes. Lily adjusting her butterfly headband. The scene was so domestic, so ordinary that it physically hurt her. Not because it was wrong, but because it felt more right than anything in her actual life, and she didn't know what to do with that. "Ryan," she said. He looked up. "Thank you for doing this." "You already thanked me." "I know. I'm thanking you again, because in about 3 hours, my mother is going to interrogate you like a congressional witness, and I want you to know that I'm grateful in advance for whatever she puts you through." Ryan finished tying Lily's shoe and stood up. "Victoria, I've survived parent-teacher conferences with 12 adults who all think their kid is gifted. I can handle your mother." She almost believed him. They arrived at 2:15 p.m. Victoria had arranged for them to come directly to the apartment, reasoning that meeting at a restaurant would feel too formal, too much like an audition. Better to let them see the space where she supposedly lived with the man she supposedly loved. Authenticity through setting. The buzzer rang. Victoria froze in the kitchen. Ryan walked to the intercom, pressed the button, and said, "Come on up, 3rd floor." "The elevator," Victoria started, "is broken. I know. They'll survive 3 flights of stairs." Victoria looked like she might actually pass out. The knock came. Ryan opened the door. Richard Hale was 62, tall, silver-haired, and carried himself with the posture of a man who had never once questioned whether he belonged in a room. He wore a sport coat over a pressed shirt, no tie, and shoes that were polished to the kind of shine that suggested a dedicated routine. Catherine Hale stood slightly behind him, shorter, elegant, with Victoria's dark eyes and a smile that arrived quickly and precisely, the way a scalpel arrives at skin. "How lovely," Catherine said, glancing into the apartment. "Fast." She said it fast. "Mr. and Mrs. Hale." Ryan extended his hand. "Ryan Carter. It's really good to meet you both." Richard shook his hand. His grip was the kind that communicated assessment rather than warmth, firm, held one beat too long, accompanied by direct eye contact that seemed designed to catalog every detail of Ryan's face, posture, and general worthiness. "Ryan," Richard said, "Victoria's told us a lot about you." "Probably more than I'm comfortable with," Ryan said. A pause. Richard studied him. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, an acknowledgement. "Fair enough," Richard said. Victoria appeared behind Ryan, and Catherine immediately reached for her daughter. They hugged, the kind of hug between mothers and daughters that contains entire unspoken conversations. When Catherine pulled back, she held Victoria's face in her hands and looked at her with the same evaluating intensity that Ryan had watched Victoria use on spreadsheets. "You look tired," Catherine said. "I'm fine, Mom." "You're working too much." "I'm expanding a company." "You can expand a company and still sleep." "That hasn't been my experience." Catherine released her daughter's face and turned to Ryan with a look that said, "You see what I deal with." Ryan recognized the expression immediately. It was the same one his own mother used to give his father when Ryan refused to wear a coat in winter. Lily appeared from behind the couch like a small, well-dressed ambush. "Hi," she said. "I'm Lily. I'm 6. Do you want to see my drawings?" Catherine Hale looked down at the 6-year-old in the butterfly headband and did something Victoria had not anticipated. She melted, completely. The polished Greenwich socialite dropped to one knee on the apartment floor and said, "I would love to see your drawings." Lily grabbed Catherine's hand and pulled her toward the refrigerator, where a gallery of crayon art was displayed in a configuration that Ryan privately called the Louvre of stick figures. Catherine followed willingly, and within 30 seconds she and Lily were engaged in a detailed discussion about why the purple house in Lily's drawing had a green door. "Because purple and green are friends," Lily explained. "Of course they are," Catherine said. Richard watched this from the doorway with an expression that was difficult to read. Then he turned to Ryan. "You have a daughter," he said. "I do." Victoria mentioned that. She didn't mention how old. 6, 1st grade. "And her mother?" The question landed cleanly, without pretense. Richard Hale was not a man who circled. He arrived. "Not in the picture," Ryan said. "She left when Lily was 4. Lily sees her occasionally, birthdays, some holidays, but day to day, it's just us." Richard nodded slowly. Ryan could feel himself being measured, not cruelly, but thoroughly, the way you'd measure a beam before trusting it to hold weight. "That's not easy," Richard said, "raising a child alone." No, sir, it isn't. Don't call me sir. Makes me feel like I'm in a courtroom. What should I call you? Richard is fine, unless you do something I don't like. Then it's Mr. Hale. Ryan couldn't tell if he was joking. He suspected Richard couldn't tell either. Victoria hovered near the kitchen, watching the two men talk with the focused anxiety of someone defusing a bomb. She caught Ryan's eye across the room, and he gave her a look that was meant to communicate calm. She received it as mild terror. The afternoon settled into an uneasy rhythm. Catherine claimed the kitchen table and began asking Victoria about the Portland expansion. Questions that were detailed enough to suggest she'd been following the business news, though she'd never admit to being that invested. Richard stood by the window with a glass of water Ryan had offered and looked out at the rain with the expression of a man who had opinions about weather and was keeping them to himself. Ryan made coffee. It was the one thing he could do without overthinking, and it gave him something to focus on besides the fact that two wealthy strangers from Connecticut were currently evaluating whether he was good enough for their daughter in an apartment where the bathroom faucet dripped and the hallway light buzzed. "How do you take it?" he asked Catherine. "Cream and 1 sugar. Thank you." "Richard?" "Black." Ryan brought them their cups. Catherine took a sip, nodded approvingly, and said nothing. Richard took a sip, set the cup down, and looked directly at Ryan. "Victoria says you're a structural engineer." "That's right, Morrison and Webb." "What kind of projects?" "Mostly bridges and commercial buildings, retrofitting older structures to meet current seismic codes. It's not glamorous, but it's the kind of work where if you do it right, nobody notices. And if you do it wrong, buildings fall down." Richard considered this. "I've always respected work where the consequences are physical. In finance, a mistake costs money. In your field, a mistake costs lives." That's one way to look at it. "Is there another?" "Most days I'm staring at spreadsheets and arguing with contractors about rebar spacing. It's more tedious than heroic." Richard made that not quite smile again. "Modesty, interesting." "Not modesty. Accuracy." Victoria, listening from the kitchen table, felt something shift in her chest. She had watched Ryan interact with her father for exactly 12 minutes, and in that time, he had done something that none of the men she'd previously introduced to her parents had managed. He hadn't tried to impress Richard Hale. He hadn't name-dropped. He hadn't inflated his job or his ambitions. He had simply stood there and been exactly who he was. And somehow, impossibly, that was working. Dinner was scheduled for 6:30 at a restaurant on East Burnside that Victoria had chosen because it was upscale enough to satisfy her parents, and casual enough that Ryan wouldn't feel like he was attending a gala. She had made the reservation 3 weeks ago. She had called twice to confirm the table. She had checked the menu online and memorized the wine list in case her father asked for a recommendation and she needed to redirect. What she had not planned for was Sabrina. They were at the restaurant for 20 minutes. Appetizers had arrived. Lily was sitting between Ryan and Catherine, carefully dismantling a bread roll with surgical precision. Richard was asking Ryan about the Hawthorne Bridge retrofit, and Ryan was explaining load distribution in a way that somehow made structural engineering interesting. Victoria was beginning to think they might actually survive this. Then the front door of the restaurant opened, and Ryan felt the temperature in the room change before he even looked up. Sabrina Ellis stood in the entrance in a red dress and heels, her blonde hair falling past her shoulders, her eyes scanning the room the way a person scans a room when they're looking for someone specific. She found Ryan almost immediately. Her gaze locked onto him, then moved to Victoria, then to the older couple at the table, then back to Ryan. And she smiled. Ryan's hand tightened around his water glass. Victoria saw it, the subtle clench of his fingers, the way his shoulders squared without him seeming to notice. She had never seen Sabrina in person, but she knew. She knew instantly from the way Ryan's body changed, the way the easy confidence he'd been carrying all afternoon drained out of him like water through a crack. Sabrina walked over. She moved the way she always moved, deliberately, aware of every pair of eyes in the room, comfortable being watched. She stopped at the edge of their table and tilted her head slightly. "Ryan," she said, "I thought that was you." "Sabrina." His voice was flat, controlled. "What are you doing here?" "I'm meeting friends." I didn't know you came to places like this. She let the words hang just long enough for the implication to register, that this restaurant, this setting, this level of dining was above his usual orbit. Then she turned her attention to the table. And who's everyone? I feel like I'm interrupting. Victoria watched Ryan struggle. She could see it happening in real time. The old script loading, the pattern his ex had trained into him. Be polite, don't make a scene, absorb it. She recognized the behavior because she had her own version of it, the one that activated whenever her mother asked about marriage. The programming of people who had been told, in 100 small ways, that their natural responses weren't acceptable. These are Victoria's parents, Ryan said, Richard and Catherine Hale. Victoria is, oh, I know who Victoria is, Sabrina said, and her smile widened. She looked at Victoria with an expression of cheerful curiosity that was sharpened at the edges. You're the roommate, right? Ryan mentioned you were renting the spare room. The word landed precisely where Sabrina intended it to. Roommate, not girlfriend, not partner. Roommate. A correction disguised as a clarification, designed to reclassify Victoria in front of her parents without saying anything directly offensive. Catherine set down her fork. Richard stopped mid-sip. Lily looked up from her bread roll, sensing the change in atmosphere the way children always do. Not understanding the words, but reading the tension in every adult's posture. Victoria felt her face go hot. Not from embarrassment, from fury. A clean, bright anger that cut through every layer of self-control she'd spent years building. This woman, this stranger who had walked away from Ryan and their daughter without looking back, was standing at their table, dismantling the fragile thing they'd built with a single word and a practiced smile. Sabrina, this isn't, Ryan started. I was just curious, Sabrina continued, addressing the table with the casual authority of someone who believed she still had ownership over the narrative. Ryan and I were together for 4 years. I know him pretty well, and I just want to make sure. She paused, looked at Victoria, looked at Ryan's parents. I just want to make sure everyone here knows what's actually going on. Ryan's jaw tightened. His hands were in his lap now, both of them clenched. He was running through every possible response and discarding each one because none of them felt strong enough and all of them felt too aggressive, and he was sitting next to his daughter and across from 2 people who were evaluating every word and gesture, and Sabrina. Victoria's voice cut through the noise, calm, level, the CEO voice, but with something underneath it that the CEO voice usually didn't carry. Sit down. Sabrina blinked. Excuse me? Sit down. If you're going to make a speech, at least don't do it standing over us like you're delivering a verdict. Sabrina didn't sit, but she shifted her weight and something in her posture lost its certainty. I'm not making a speech, Sabrina said. I'm just asking a simple question. Then ask it. Fine. Sabrina looked at Ryan, then at Victoria, then at the small hand that Victoria had placed, casually, naturally, without looking down, on Ryan's arm. So, is she just your roommate? The table went still. Catherine's fingers hovered over her napkin. Richard's eyes moved between his daughter and the blonde woman standing at the table. Lily's bread roll sat forgotten on her plate. And Ryan sat there with his chest tight and his pulse loud in his ears, and the old familiar feeling of being not enough pressing against him from every direction. Victoria looked at Sabrina, not with anger, not with the defensive fire that Sabrina was expecting. She looked at her the way you look at someone who has just revealed exactly how small they are without realizing it. No, Victoria said. He's the man I love. The words came out steady, unhurried, without the slightest tremor of performance or pretense. They came out the way truth comes out when a person finally stops running from it. Clean and simple and completely irreversible. Ryan turned to look at her. His face was open in a way she hadn't seen before, stripped of the careful neutrality he wore like armor. He was looking at her like someone who had just heard a sound he'd been waiting for without knowing he was listening. Victoria held his gaze. And then, in front of Sabrina and her parents, and her daughter, and every other person in the restaurant who had turned slightly to watch the unfolding tension at table 9, Victoria leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't theatrical, it wasn't long, it was soft and firm and honest, And when she pulled back, her hand was still on his arm and her eyes were still on his, and the message was clear. I am not pretending. Ryan's hand found hers under the table. His fingers laced through hers, and he squeezed. Not for the audience, not for her parents, not to complete the lie. He squeezed because something inside him that had been locked for 2 years had just cracked open, and Victoria's hand was the only thing keeping him anchored to the moment. Sabrina stood at the edge of the table. Her smile had collapsed into something brittle, and her eyes moved rapidly between the two of them, searching for the seam in the performance, the crack in the act. She didn't find one, because it wasn't an act anymore. Well, Sabrina said. Her voice had lost its sharpness. That's good for you, Ryan. It is, he said quietly. And he meant it. Sabrina looked at him one more time, really looked at him, the way she used to when they were together, when she was trying to find the version of him she wanted instead of the version he was. Whatever she saw now, it wasn't what she expected. The quiet man at the table was the same man she'd left, but the context had changed. He wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't waiting. He was holding someone's hand under the table and looking at her with the kind of calm certainty that Sabrina had always wanted him to project, but that he could only produce when it was genuine. She left without saying goodbye. The click of her heels on the restaurant floor faded toward the entrance, and then she was gone. The table was silent for several seconds. Lily looked around at the adults. Was that lady mad? She asked. She was confused, Ryan said, but she figured it out. Catherine picked up her fork. Richard took a long, slow sip of his scotch. And then Catherine looked across the table at Victoria. Really looked, the way mothers look at their daughters when they're trying to see past the surface, and said, How long have you been in love with him? Victoria opened her mouth. The CEO in her wanted to deflect, to manage the question, to construct a careful answer that fit the story they'd prepared. But the woman sitting at the table, the one whose hand was still tangled with Ryan's under the cloth napkin, couldn't find the energy to perform anymore. Longer than I realized, she said. Catherine nodded. Something in her expression softened, not all the way because Victoria Hale was not a woman who softened all the way, but enough to matter. Enough for Victoria to see it and feel, for the first time in years, that her mother was looking at her with something that wasn't conditional. Richard cleared his throat. Ryan. Yes? The woman who just left. That was your ex? Yes. She seems like the kind of person who enters rooms expecting applause. Ryan let out a short, surprised laugh. That's incredibly accurate. Richard looked at his daughter, then at Ryan, then at their joined hands resting on the table where they'd surfaced without either of them noticing. He nodded once, a single, decisive movement that carried more approval than a speech. Order the steak, Richard said. It's on me. The rest of dinner was not perfect. Lily spilled her juice. Ryan mispronounced the name of the wine Victoria had ordered and didn't pretend otherwise. Catherine asked 3 more questions about the relationship timeline that required creative navigation. Richard ate his steak in near silence and watched the table the way a man watches something he's deciding whether to invest in. But the tension had broken. Sabrina's appearance, designed to destroy, had done the opposite. It had forced something real out of the act, and now the act was gone, replaced by something messier and less rehearsed and far more convincing. On the walk back to the apartment, Lily held Ryan's hand on one side and Catherine's on the other, chattering about Gerald the Caterpillar's progress. Richard walked slightly ahead, hands clasped behind his back, navigating the wet sidewalk with the deliberate stride of a man who refused to acknowledge puddles. Victoria walked beside Ryan, their shoulders touching but their hands separate now, the kiss still sitting between them like a question neither of them had answered. That was brave, Ryan said quietly, so only she could hear. That was terrifying. Same thing. She looked at him sideways. Is it? In my experience, yeah. They reached the building. Richard and Catherine said goodnight in the lobby. They were staying at a hotel downtown, a boutique place Victoria had booked that cost more per night than Ryan's monthly grocery budget. Catherine hugged Victoria and then, surprisingly, hugged Ryan. It was brief, formal, but real. Richard shook Ryan's hand. Same firm grip as before, but this time held 1 beat longer. Not an assessment, an acknowledgement. "Tomorrow," Richard said. "Brunch, 10 o'clock. "We'll be there," Ryan said. The door closed. The lobby went quiet. Lily yawned against Ryan's leg, and he scooped her up, and they climbed 3 flights of stairs in silence. Ryan carrying his daughter, Victoria walking beside him with her heels in one hand and her other hand trailing along the railing. Inside the apartment, Ryan carried Lily to her room and put her to bed. He pulled the blanket up, tucked the edges the way she liked, and set her stuffed rabbit on the pillow next to her head. She was already half asleep. "Daddy?" "Yeah, baby." "Victoria's mommy is nice." "She is." "Victoria kissed you." His hand stopped on the blanket. "She did." "Does that mean she's your girlfriend now?" "I don't know, Lily. That's a grown-up conversation." "Grown-up conversations take forever." "They do. Go to sleep." He kissed her forehead and turned off the light. Victoria was in the kitchen. She had poured 2 glasses of wine and was standing at the counter with both hands wrapped around hers, staring at the wall the same way she'd been staring the night she asked him to pretend. Except now the stare wasn't anxious. It was something else. The look of a person standing at the edge of something they hadn't planned for. Ryan picked up the other glass. They stood on opposite sides of the small kitchen, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the faucet dripping its slow, persistent rhythm. "We should probably talk about what happened," Victoria said. "Probably." "At the restaurant, when I said that you love me." She flinched, not from the words, from hearing them reflected back at her in his quiet, unhurried voice. "That was supposed to be part of the act," she said. "Was it?" She didn't answer. "Victoria, I don't know." She set down her wine. Her hands were shaking, not a lot, just enough that the surface of the wine had trembled before she let go. "I don't know what it was. I know what I planned to say. I had a script in my head, something casual, something that would shut Sabrina down without making it a declaration. And then she was standing there, looking at you like you were something she'd discarded, and I just—" She pressed her palms flat on the counter. "I didn't say what I planned. I said what I felt." The kitchen was very quiet. The rain had started again outside. "You don't have to mean it," Ryan said. "It worked. Your parents believe us. That's what matters." "Is that what matters?" He took a drink of his wine, set it down. "What do you want me to say, Victoria?" "I want you to say what's true." He looked at her across the kitchen, the woman who had shown up at his door in a coat that cost more than his couch, and who was now standing barefoot in his kitchen with mascara slightly smudged under one eye, and her hands pressed against cheap laminate countertop. "What's true," he said slowly, "is that when you kissed me, I didn't want you to stop. What's true is that I've been falling for you since the morning my daughter invited you to pancakes, and I've been telling myself it was just proximity and convenience, and the fact that you're the first adult who's talked to me like a person instead of a project in 2 years. What's true is that I'm scared, Victoria, because the last time I let someone in, she decided I wasn't enough, and I spent 2 years rebuilding my life around that verdict." Victoria's eyes were bright. She didn't blink. She didn't look away. "And what's also true," he continued, "is that you told a room full of people you love me, and I have no idea if you meant it, and I need you to tell me. Not the CEO, not the woman running the performance. You." She crossed the kitchen. 3 steps. The apartment was small enough that 3 steps covered the entire distance between them. She stopped close enough that he could smell her perfume. Something subtle, something he'd been noticing for weeks without naming. "I meant it," she said. "I wasn't ready to mean it. I didn't plan to mean it. But I meant it." He looked at her face, the slightly smudged mascara, the tension in her jaw, the way her eyes kept searching his, looking for something she was afraid wouldn't be there. "Okay?" he said. "Okay? Okay. We figure this out, not tonight, not in a rush, but we figure it out." "What about the act? My parents—" "Forget the act. Whatever this is, it's not an act anymore. We both know that." She exhaled. A long, shuddering breath that carried more weight than she'd meant to show. And then she leaned forward, rested her forehead against his chest, and stood there. Not kissing him, not saying anything. Just standing in the circle of his stillness, breathing, letting herself be held up by someone else's gravity for the first time in years. Ryan put his arms around her. Not tightly, loosely, carefully, the way you hold something you're not sure you're allowed to keep. The faucet dripped, the rain fell, and in a kitchen that smelled like coffee grounds and dish soap, two people who had spent years building walls around themselves stood together in the rubble and didn't try to rebuild. Ryan didn't sleep that night. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain, replaying the kitchen conversation in his head like a man rewinding the same 30 seconds of a recording. I meant it. 3 words. She had said 3 words, and they had rearranged the furniture inside his chest so completely that he couldn't find where anything used to be. He got up at 5 a.m., went to the kitchen, and made coffee. The 2 wine glasses from last night were still on the counter, side by side. He washed them both, dried them, put them away. Then he stood at the sink and stared at the wall and tried to figure out what the hell he was doing. He was 32 years old. He had a daughter who needed stability. He had a life that functioned precisely because he had stripped it down to the essentials and eliminated everything unpredictable. And now, standing in his kitchen at 5 in the morning, he was in love with a woman who had moved into his spare room 8 weeks ago and whose parents were expecting brunch in 5 hours. The coffee maker beeped. He poured a cup. It tasted the same as always, mediocre and necessary. But the kitchen felt different. Everything felt different, like someone had taken the apartment apart overnight and reassembled it with all the same pieces in slightly different positions. Victoria's door opened at 6:15. He heard her footsteps in the hallway, softer than usual, hesitant. And then she appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing the same oversized sweater she'd been wearing the morning Lily gave her the drawing. No makeup, hair pulled back loosely. She looked like someone who hadn't slept either. "Coffee?" he asked. "Please." He poured her a cup. Their fingers touched during the handoff. Neither of them pulled away, and neither of them acknowledged it. And somehow that was more intimate than the kiss at the restaurant. They stood in the kitchen together, not talking, just existing in the same space with the same unspoken thing between them and the same uncertainty about what to do next. "I panicked a little this morning," Victoria said. "About last night?" "About all of it. The kiss, what I said, what you said, my parents coming back for brunch, the fact that we went from a fake relationship to a real conversation in about 6 hours, and I haven't processed any of it." She took a sip of coffee. "I'm very good at processing things, Ryan. I process quarterly earnings reports with 200 data points. I process vendor contracts in 3 languages, but this..." She gestured vaguely between them. "I don't know how to process this." "Maybe you don't have to process it." That's a terrifying suggestion. "Welcome to how most people live." She looked at him over the rim of her mug. "Is this how you do things? Just feel something and accept it?" "No. This is how I do things. Feel something, deny it for 3 weeks, have a conversation at midnight, and then lie awake until 5 a.m., questioning every decision I've ever made." "Oh, so we're doing the same thing." Exactly the same thing. She almost smiled. It was the kind of almost smile that meant more than a full one. The kind that happens when 2 people recognize the same mess in each other and find it comforting instead of alarming. "What do we do about brunch?" she asked. "We go to brunch." "As what? What are we?" Ryan set down his mug. "We're 2 people who care about each other and haven't figured out the details yet. Your parents don't need a label. They need to see that you're with someone who gives a damn, and I do. So we go to brunch, we eat overpriced eggs, and we deal with the rest later." "You make everything sound so simple." "Nothing about this is simple. I'm just tired of making it complicated." Lily woke up at 7:30, appeared in the kitchen with bedhead and 1 sock, and demanded waffles. Ryan didn't have a waffle iron. He offered pancakes. Lily negotiated for pancakes with chocolate chips. Ryan countered with pancakes with 3 chocolate chips each. Lily accepted the terms. Victoria watched this exchange from the kitchen table with her chin resting on her hand and an expression on her face that she couldn't have named if someone had asked her to. It wasn't happiness. It was too raw for that, too close to the bone. It was the feeling of watching something ordinary and realizing it was the thing you'd been missing without knowing you were looking for it. Brunch was at 10 o'clock at a place on Northwest 23rd that served Eggs Benedict on artisanal bread and charged $17 for orange juice. Victoria's parents were already seated when they arrived. Richard with the newspaper he'd brought from the hotel, Catherine with a menu she was studying like a legal document. The dynamic was different from dinner. Sabrina's interruption had done something to the room's chemistry. It had stripped away the performance and left behind something that was rougher, less rehearsed, but harder to dismiss. Richard looked at Ryan differently now, not with suspicion, but with the careful attention of a man who had watched another man get ambushed and noted how he handled it. "Sleep well?" Richard asked as they sat down. "Like a rock," Ryan lied. "Liar," Victoria murmured, quiet enough that only Ryan heard. He nudged her knee under the table. Catherine had questions. Of course Catherine had questions. She had been holding them back at dinner. Sabrina's arrival had disrupted her timeline, and now she deployed them with the organized precision of a woman who had been preparing cross-examination since before her daughter started a company. "Ryan, Victoria tells me you studied at Oregon State." "Yes, ma'am. Civil engineering, then a master's in structural." "And you chose Portland because I grew up here. My parents were here. After they passed, I thought about leaving, but by then Lily was on the way, and Portland was the only home I knew how to build a life in." Catherine absorbed this. Ryan could see her filing it. The dead parents, the choice to stay, the pragmatism mixed with sentiment. He wondered what category she was placing him in. The good category or the concerning one. "Do you plan to stay?" "In Portland?" "Yeah. This is where Lily's school is, where my job is. I don't have any reason to leave." Catherine looked at Victoria. "And your Portland office, how long-term is the expansion?" Victoria set down her fork. "It's permanent, Mom. I'm not going back to San Francisco." This was news. Ryan kept his face neutral, but he felt something move in his chest. A small, involuntary shift, like a compass needle turning toward north. She hadn't told him that. She hadn't told her parents either, apparently, because Catherine's eyebrows rose exactly 2 millimeters, and Richard lowered his newspaper. "Permanent," Catherine repeated. "The Portland office is outperforming San Francisco in 3 categories. The talent pool here is strong, the cost of living is manageable, and Victoria paused, took a breath. "And this is where my life is now." She didn't look at Ryan when she said it. She didn't have to. Everyone at the table understood the sentence contained more than business strategy. Richard folded his newspaper and set it beside his plate. He looked at his daughter for a long moment, and Ryan watched something pass between them. The kind of silent exchange that only happens between parents and children who have decades of shared vocabulary that doesn't require words. "Good," Richard said. "The San Francisco real estate market is overvalued anyway." It was, Ryan realized, the closest Richard Hale would ever come to saying he approved. Lily, who had been quietly consuming a stack of silver dollar pancakes with the focused intensity of a 6-year-old on a mission, looked up and announced, "Victoria helps me with my homework sometimes." Catherine turned to her granddaughter, a title she hadn't been offered but had apparently claimed, with immediate interest. "Does she?" "She's good at math. Daddy is good at reading. Victoria knows how to make the numbers make sense." "That's her job, sweetheart." "Her job is numbers?" "In a way, yes." Lily considered this. "That's boring." Victoria laughed. A real laugh. The kind that came from her stomach and crinkled the corners of her eyes and made her look 10 years younger. Catherine watched her daughter laugh, and something in her face changed. It was subtle, a softening around the mouth, a slight tilt of the head. But Ryan caught it. It was the look of a mother seeing her child happy and being surprised by it. As if happiness was something she'd stopped expecting from Victoria a long time ago. After brunch, they walked. It was Victoria's idea. She suggested showing her parents the neighborhood, which was really just an excuse to keep the visit going without the pressure of sitting across a table. Portland was doing its best that morning. The rain had paused, the trees along 23rd Avenue were still holding their autumn color, and the sidewalks were wet enough to reflect light, but dry enough to walk without slipping. Lily held Richard's hand. This was perhaps the most astonishing development of the entire weekend. Richard Hale, investment firm patriarch, Greenwich establishment pillar, a man who ironed his weekend shirts, was walking down a Portland sidewalk holding the sticky hand of a 6-year-old who was telling him about Gerald the caterpillar's ongoing metamorphosis. "He's been in the cocoon for 9 days," Lily reported. That seems like a long time. Mrs. Henderson says it takes 2 weeks, but I think Gerald is fast. You think he's ahead of schedule? Yes. I respect that about Gerald. Ryan and Victoria walked behind them. Catherine was slightly ahead, peering into shop windows with the selective interest of a woman who had opinions about everything she saw, but voiced only the positive ones. Your dad is holding my daughter's hand, Ryan said. I know. I've never seen him do that. What, hold a child's hand? Be casual with anyone. He was never casual with me and Andrew. He was present. He was involved. But he was always, I don't know how to describe it, on duty. Like parenting was a position he held rather than something he felt. Maybe he's different with grandkids. She's not his grandkid. Tell him that. Victoria watched her father and Lily walking ahead of them. The tall, silver-haired man and the small girl with the butterfly headband, and something she had been holding tightly inside her chest for a very long time, began to loosen. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a slow, quiet release, like a fist unclenching underwater. Ryan. Yeah? I need to tell them the truth. He looked at her. Now? Not now, but soon, before they leave. I can't build something real with you on a foundation of lies, I told them. And I can't let them love you, because they're starting to, I can see it, based on a story I made up while drinking wine alone in my San Francisco apartment. What do you think they'll do? My mother will be hurt. My father will be angry, not because of the lie itself. They'll understand why I did it. They'll be angry because I didn't trust them enough to tell the truth in the first place. Do you want me to be there when you tell them? She thought about it. No, this is between me and them. I made the mess. I need to clean it up. Okay. But afterward, if they want to talk to you, I'll be here. She reached over and took his hand. They walked like that for half a block. Her fingers laced through his, their arms swinging slightly with each step. And Ryan felt, with an almost painful clarity, the difference between performing a relationship and actually being in one. The performance was calculated, deliberate, self-conscious. This was just two people walking down a street, holding hands because they wanted to, because the simple weight of another person's hand was enough to make the whole world feel slightly less difficult. Catherine looked back at them over her shoulder. She saw their hands. She didn't say anything, but she smiled. Not the fast, polished smile she used for compliments she didn't mean. A slow one, the kind that started in her eyes and worked its way down. They said goodbye at the hotel at 2 p.m. Richard and Catherine were flying back to Connecticut in the morning. Catherine hugged Ryan again, longer this time, less formal, and whispered something to Victoria that Ryan couldn't hear, but that made Victoria's eyes go bright and wet. Richard shook Ryan's hand and held it. Take care of yourself, Richard said, and your daughter. I will. And my daughter. Ryan met his eyes. Yes, sir. Richard didn't correct him this time. They drove home in Victoria's rental car. Lily fell asleep in the back seat within 3 minutes, her head tilted against the window, the butterfly headband sliding off at an angle. Victoria drove in silence, both hands on the wheel, her eyes on the road but her mind clearly somewhere else. I'll call them tomorrow night, she said as they pulled into the building's parking lot. After they've had a day to settle back in. You sure you don't want to wait? If I wait, I'll lose my nerve, and I'll convince myself that the lie is protecting them instead of protecting me. She turned off the engine. I owe them honesty, even if it costs me. Ryan unbuckled Lily from her car seat and carried her upstairs. She stayed asleep through the hallway, the elevator, which was somehow, miraculously, working for the first time in months, and the apartment door. He laid her on her bed, removed her shoes, and pulled the blanket up. The butterfly headband ended up on her nightstand next to a crayon drawing of Gerald the caterpillar and a plastic cup full of markers. When he came back to the living room, Victoria was sitting on the couch with her phone in her hands. She wasn't looking at it. She was holding it the way a person holds something they're afraid to use. He sat down next to her. Not touching. Close. Tell me something, she said. Anything. When Sabrina left, when it was over and you were alone with Lily, what was the worst part? He didn't answer immediately. He'd been asked versions of this question before, by friends, by his doctor, by the therapist he'd seen for 4 months before he stopped going because the appointments conflicted with Lily's swim lessons. But nobody had ever asked it the way Victoria was asking it. Not with pity, not with clinical detachment, but with the focused attention of someone who needed to understand because her own survival depended on it. The worst part wasn't the loneliness, he said. The worst part was the relief. When she left, part of me was relieved, because I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to wake up every morning and perform a version of myself that she might find acceptable. And then I felt guilty about being relieved, which was worse than the loneliness, because at least loneliness is honest. Guilt about feeling relieved is just, it's layers. It's lies on top of lies about how you're supposed to feel. Victoria set her phone on the coffee table. She turned toward him on the couch, tucking one leg under her. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of," she said. "Not losing my parents' approval. Losing the need for it. Because if I stop needing it, if I tell them the truth and survive, then every decision I've made based on earning it was a waste. Every compromise, every performance, every man I dated because he looked right on paper. All of it. Wasted. It's not wasted. It got you here. Here's a 2-bedroom apartment in Portland with a cracked bathroom faucet. Here is sitting next to someone who knows who you actually are, not the CEO, not the daughter, not the performance. You. That's not a small thing, Victoria." She was quiet for a long time. The apartment settled around them. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic on Belmont, the soft rhythm of Lily's breathing drifting down the hallway like something fragile and permanent at the same time. "I'm going to tell them everything," Victoria said. "The fake relationship, the lie about dating you, the whole thing. And then I'm going to tell them that somewhere in the middle of the lie, I fell in love with you for real. And I'm going to let them decide what they do with that. And if they're angry, then they're angry. I've survived worse than my parents' disappointment. I just never believed that until now." She leaned her head against his shoulder. He rested his cheek against her hair. They sat like that for a long time. Long enough for the light outside to shift from afternoon to early evening, long enough for the shadows to move across the living room floor, and the silence to become something that felt less like absence and more like presence. Ryan thought about the morning 8 weeks ago when he'd opened his apartment door and found a woman in a charcoal coat speaking into her phone about vendor timelines and prototype deliveries. He thought about the distance he'd felt between them, the CEO and the engineer, the penthouse and the third-floor walk-up, the woman who negotiated million-dollar contracts and the man who wrapped sandwich bags around his daughter's shoes. That distance had been real. It still was, in some ways. They were different people with different lives and different vocabularies for the same emotions. But somewhere in the last 8 weeks, the distance had stopped mattering. Not because they'd bridged it. That would be too neat, too clean, too much like a story where everything resolves perfectly. They hadn't bridged it. They just stopped pretending it was a reason to stay apart. "Ryan?" Victoria's voice was muffled against his shoulder. "Yeah?" "I don't want to go back to my room tonight." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to." I just mean I don't want to be on the other side of the wall. I want to be here, on this couch, with you." "The couch is terrible for your back." "I don't care." "You will at 40. "I'll deal with it at 40. He pulled the blanket off the back of the couch, the old fleece one with the coffee stain that Lily had spilled 2 years ago, and draped it over both of them. Victoria shifted closer, fitting herself against his side with the awkward, imperfect geometry of 2 bodies that hadn't figured out how they worked together yet. Her elbow poked his ribs. His arm was at an angle that would definitely be numb by morning. It was uncomfortable and clumsy and completely insufficient as a sleeping arrangement. Neither of them moved. The phone on the coffee table stayed dark. Tomorrow, Victoria would pick it up and call her parents and tell them the truth and deal with whatever came after. Tomorrow, Ryan would face the reality that his carefully constructed, safely static life had been permanently altered by a woman who had arrived with a leather weekend bag and a phone full of vendor timelines. Tomorrow, they would both have to figure out what this was. Not the act, not the performance, but the real, unglamorous, uncertain thing that had grown between them in the space where the lie used to be. But tonight, In the dim light of an apartment that smelled like cold coffee and crayons, they slept on a couch that was too small for two people, under a blanket with a stain, and the only sound was the rain and the hum of a refrigerator, and the steady breathing of a 6-year-old girl in the next room who had started the whole thing by knocking on a stranger's door and offering a drawing of a purple house. Victoria made the call on Monday evening. Ryan was in Lily's room, sitting on the edge of the bed, reading a chapter from a book about a mouse who wanted to be a knight. Lily was curled against his side, half listening, half asleep, her fingers wrapped loosely around the ear of her stuffed rabbit. Through the thin wall, he could hear Victoria's voice, not the words, just the cadence. Measured at first. Careful. Then something shifted, and the cadence broke, and what came through the wall was the raw, unsteady sound of a woman telling her parents the truth for the first time in 6 months. He kept reading. The mouse found a thimble and used it as a helmet. The mouse challenged a cat to a duel. Lily's eyes were closed now, her breathing slow and even, and Ryan turned the page quietly and listened to the woman in the next room dismantling the lie that had brought them together. The call lasted 47 minutes. He knew because he checked the clock when Victoria's voice finally went quiet, and the silence that followed was the heavy kind, the kind that fills a room after something important has ended and the air hasn't figured out what to do with itself yet. He closed the book, eased Lily's head onto the pillow, and tucked the blanket around her. He left the door cracked the way she liked. Enough light from the hallway to see by, enough darkness to sleep. Victoria was sitting on her bed with her phone face down on the mattress beside her. Her eyes were red. Not crying, past crying. The stage where the tears have stopped but the face hasn't recovered yet, and every muscle is slightly swollen from the effort of holding together while falling apart. Ryan leaned against the doorframe. "How'd it go?" "My mother cried." Victoria's voice was hoarse. Not angry crying, hurt crying, the kind where she doesn't make any sound and you just see her chin shaking and you know you did that. You made your mother's chin shake. "And your dad?" "He was quiet." "Which is worse. My dad yelling, 'I can handle.' My dad going quiet means he's processing. And when he finishes processing, whatever he says is going to be final and precise, and it's going to stay with me for the rest of my life." "What did he say?" Victoria looked down at her hands. She turned them over, palms up, as if checking for something that wasn't there. "He said, 'Victoria, I'm not angry that you lied. I'm angry that you felt you had to.'" Ryan was quiet. "And then he said, 'The man we met this weekend, is that real? Whatever is between you, is that real?' And I said yes. And he said, 'Then we'll have dinner again, when you're both ready, as whatever you actually are.'" That doesn't sound bad. "It's not bad, it's..." She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "It's the thing I was most afraid of. Not that they'd reject me, that they'd understand. Because if they understand, then I wasted 6 months lying to people who would have accepted the truth. And that means the problem was never them. It was me." Ryan crossed the room and sat beside her on the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. The cheap mattress from the furnished room, the one that was probably 15 years old and had the structural integrity of a folded towel. He sat close enough that their arms touched. "The problem being you doesn't make you a bad person," he said. "It makes you someone who learned the wrong lesson about what people can handle. You'll learn the right one." "When?" "I don't know. I'm still learning mine." She leaned into him. He put his arm around her shoulders, and they sat there on the edge of the bed in the small room that still had the desk lamp he'd bought from the hardware store and the off-white walls and the window that looked out onto a brick wall. It was the least romantic setting imaginable. It was enough. "My mother asked about Lily," Victoria said. "What about her?" "She asked if Lily knows. About us. About what's happening." "Does she?" "She's 6, Ryan. She knows more than either of us." He laughed. It was a tired laugh, the kind that comes out at the end of a day when you've been carrying something heavy and someone says something true enough to make you set it down for a second. "She asked me this morning if you were going to keep living here," he said. "I told her I hoped so. She said, 'Good, because Victoria makes better pancakes than you.'" "I don't make pancakes." "I know. She's negotiating. She wants you to start." Victoria smiled. It was a small, exhausted, lopsided smile. The kind that happens when a person is too drained for anything bigger, but the happiness is real enough that it finds a way out anyway. The weeks after that were not a montage. They were not a sequence of sunlit moments edited together with soft music and meaningful glances. They were ordinary. Ordinary in the way that actual life is ordinary, sick, full of small irritations and minor victories and stretches of time where nothing happens except the slow, unglamorous work of two people figuring out how to exist in the same space without the scaffolding of a lie holding them up. Victoria moved her things from the spare room to Ryan's bedroom on a Wednesday. Not all at once. She brought the leather bag first, then the laptop, then the stack of business journals she kept on the desk, but never read. The process took 3 days, which was absurd for a room that was 12 feet away, but neither of them acknowledged the absurdity because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that what they were doing was significant, and they had both apparently decided to treat significance the same way they treated complicated emotions, by approaching it sideways and pretending it was casual. The apartment adjusted, or rather, the 3 people in it adjusted to each other in the way that people do when they're building a household instead of just sharing one. Victoria learned that Ryan could not be spoken to before his first cup of coffee. Ryan learned that Victoria took work calls at 6 a.m. and that the phrase quick sync was a lie that meant 45 minutes minimum. Lily learned that if she asked Victoria for help with math homework instead of Ryan, the answers came faster and involved fewer dramatic sighs. There were fights, not dramatic ones, not the kind with slammed doors and raised voices and declarations that would require apologies delivered with flowers. These were the low-grade friction fires of cohabitation. Who left the kitchen light on? Whose turn it was to take out the recycling? Whether the thermostat should be set at 68 or 72. 68 is freezing, Victoria said one night. 68 is normal. 72 is a sauna. You grew up in Oregon. You're acclimated. I'm from Connecticut. Connecticut gets colder than Oregon. Not inside. We had insulation. We have insulation. You have drywall and optimism. He turned the thermostat to 70 and called it a compromise. She put on a sweater and called it a concession. They both knew it was the kind of argument that meant nothing and everything. The argument of 2 people who were comfortable enough to be annoyed at each other without being afraid of what the annoyance meant. But there were harder things too. Things that didn't resolve as easily as thermostat negotiations. Victoria worked too much. Ryan knew it. She knew it. Lily knew it. In the way that children know things without understanding them. She noticed when Victoria missed dinner, when the laptop was open during movie night, when the phone calls stretched past bedtime, and the woman who had helped her with homework at 5 o'clock was locked in her room with spreadsheets by 7 o'clock. "You missed Lily's thing today," Ryan said one evening in December. Victoria was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and 3 tabs running and a half-eaten sandwich that had been half-eaten for 2 hours. She looked up. "What thing?" "The holiday concert. At school." She sang a song about a snowman. She wore a hat made of newspaper. Victoria's face went through several stages. Confusion first. She hadn't known about the concert. Then realization. She had known because Lily had told her last week, and she'd said she would try to be there. Then guilt. The specific acidic kind that burns worse than anger because there's no one to direct it at but yourself. "I had the vendor call, the one with soul. It ran long and I know. I told Marcus to handle it, but he kept deferring to me and, Victoria, I know." She closed her laptop. "Was she upset?" "She asked where you were. I told her you had to work. She said okay and went back to singing." "That's worse." "What?" "That's worse than her being upset. If she was upset, it would mean she expected me to be there. If she just said okay," Victoria's voice caught, "it means she already expects me not to show up." Ryan sat down across from her. The kitchen light buzzed. The sandwich sat between them like an artifact from a previous civilization. "She's 6, he said. "She's not keeping a scoreboard. But she notices. Kids notice. And the thing about being important to a kid is that it's not about the big stuff. It's about the dumb stuff, the newspaper hat, the snowman song, the moments that seem completely insignificant to you, but that she's going to remember when she's 30. "I don't know how to do this, Ryan." "Do what?" "Be this. Be a person who shows up to school concerts and helps with homework and cares about newspaper hats. I know how to run a company. I know how to manage a board and close a deal and read a P&L statement. But this domestic thing, I never learned it. Nobody taught me. My mother outsourced it. My father delegated it. I was raised by performance expectations and a nanny named Helen who was kind, but who went home at 6 o'clock every night. She wasn't making excuses. She was mapping the territory of her own limitations, the way she might map a market she was entering for the first time, with honesty about what she didn't know and a stubborn refusal to pretend she had it figured out. Nobody learns it beforehand, Ryan said. I didn't know how to be a dad until I was 1. The first 6 months after Lily was born, I was terrified every single day. I thought I was going to break her. Not physically, emotionally. I thought I was going to damage her by being the wrong kind of father, the kind who didn't know the right songs or the right bedtime routine or the right way to hold a bottle. And I was wrong. Not about being scared. I was scared for a solid year, but about what she needed. She didn't need a perfect dad. She needed a present one. Same thing applies to you. Victoria looked at him. Her eyes were tired. Not sleepy tired, the deep kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to put it down. I'm going to miss things, she said. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to have days where the company needs me, and Lily needs me, and you need me, and I don't have enough of myself to go around. And I need you to tell me, not forgive me in advance, not give me a permanent pass, but tell me when I'm getting it wrong, because nobody in my life has ever done that. My employees are afraid to. My parents never did. And I need someone who will. I can do that. Even when I get defensive? Especially then. I get very defensive. I noticed. She threw the half-eaten sandwich at him. He caught it. They both laughed, and the laughter loosened something in the room that had been pulled tight. And for a moment, the kitchen was just a kitchen again, but small, bright, slightly cluttered, the kind of room where 2 people could have a hard conversation and come out the other side still wanting to sit at the same table. Victoria went to the next school event. It was a Friday afternoon art show. Lily's class had made collages out of magazine clippings and tissue paper, and Victoria left a board meeting 20 minutes early to get there. She stood in the elementary school hallway in a blazer and heels, surrounded by parents in jeans and sneakers, looking exactly as out of place as she felt. But she was there. Lily found her in the crowd and grabbed her hand and pulled her to the wall where her collage was hanging. It was a picture of a house, not the purple house from the drawing she'd given Victoria months ago, but a new one. This house was blue, with a red door, and in front of it stood 3 stick figures, a tall one, a medium one, and a small one with what appeared to be wings. That's us, Lily said. Victoria stared at the collage. The magazine clippings were uneven. The tissue paper was wrinkled. The glue was visible in several places, and the stick figures were proportionally impossible. It was, by any objective measure, a mess. Victoria's vision blurred. She blinked hard and crouched down next to Lily. It's perfect, she said. It's not perfect. The door is crooked. Crooked doors are the best kind. That doesn't make sense. I know, but I mean it. Ryan found them there 5 minutes later. Victoria crouched on the hallway floor, Lily leaning against her side, both of them looking up at a crooked collage of a blue house where 3 imperfect people lived an imperfect life. He stood at the end of the hallway and watched them, and something settled inside him that had been unsettled for a very long time. Not excitement, not relief. Something quieter. The feeling of watching a structure you've been building finally hold weight. Christmas came. Victoria had never decorated a Christmas tree before. Her family had always had theirs done by a service, delivered fully ornamented, positioned in the foyer like a piece of corporate art. Ryan's tree was a 5-foot Douglas fir from the lot on Hawthorne, slightly lopsided, with needles that dropped every time someone walked past it. Lily directed the decorating with the authority of a 6-year-old dictator. Tinsel went on the bottom branches because those were the only ones she could reach. The star went on top, except it wasn't a star. It was a paper angel she'd made in class, with 1 crooked wing and a face drawn in purple marker. Is that angel supposed to look angry? Ryan asked. She's not angry. She's determined. Determined about what? About being on top of the tree. Victoria hung ornaments on the middle branches and tried not to think about the fact that this was the happiest she'd been during a holiday season since she was a child. It was a dangerous thought, the kind that made her want to hold on tighter and run away at the same time. So she set it aside and focused on spacing the ornaments evenly, which Lily immediately ruined by clustering 3 red ones together because red was the best Christmas color and also the best color for everything. On Christmas morning, Lily opened her presents on the living room floor while Ryan made coffee and Victoria sat on the couch in flannel pajama pants she had borrowed from Ryan and never returned. It was a scene so domestic, so ordinary, so completely unremarkable that Victoria had to look away for a moment because the ordinariness of it was the most extraordinary thing she had ever experienced. Lily held up a drawing pad, a gift from Victoria. "This is the big one?" 200 pages, Victoria said. "You can draw whatever you want." 200? Lily's eyes went wide. That's like infinity. It's significantly less than infinity, but yes, it's a lot. Lily launched herself off the floor and onto the couch and into Victoria's lap, with the full-body commitment of a child who has not yet learned to moderate physical affection. Victoria caught her, awkwardly, one arm at a bad angle, the drawing pad pressed between them, and held on. Ryan watched from the kitchen doorway with a coffee mug in his hand and a feeling in his chest that he didn't have a word for. It wasn't love, or it was love, but not the kind he'd experienced before, not the urgent, anxious love he'd felt with Sabrina, where every moment was shadowed by the fear that he wasn't enough. This was different. This was the love of watching someone choose your life, your actual life, with its cracked faucets and its cheap furniture and its 5-foot lopsided tree, and decide it was worth staying for. That evening, after Lily was in bed, Victoria's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her mother. "Hi, Mom." Ryan could hear Catherine's voice on the other end. Not the words, but the tone. Warm, careful. The tone of a mother who was still processing a confession from 3 weeks ago, but who had decided that love outweighed anger. Victoria listened for a long time. Then she said, "I'd like that. We'd all like that." She hung up and looked at Ryan. "My parents want us to come to dinner. In Greenwich, all 3 of us. All 3. You, me, and Lily." My mother specifically said Lily. Victoria paused. She said, "Bring the little one with the drawings." Ryan sat down beside her. "When?" "Whenever we're ready." "Are you ready?" Victoria looked around the apartment. The tree with its crooked angel, the crayon drawings on the fridge, the coffee stain on the couch blanket, the life she had fallen into by accident and chosen on purpose. "Yeah," she said, "I think I finally am." Ryan put his arm around her. She leaned into him. The tree lights blinked their slow, uneven pattern, one bulb slightly dimmer than the others, one strand slightly tangled. And outside the window, Portland was dark and wet and cold. And inside the apartment, 3 people who had found each other through a lie were building something true, one ordinary evening at a time. They flew to Greenwich on a Saturday in late January. Ryan had never been to Connecticut. He had never been east of Denver, actually, which was something he didn't mention to Victoria because it seemed like the kind of detail that would make the gap between their worlds feel wider than it needed to. He packed a suitcase, the same one he'd used for a work conference in Seattle 3 years ago, and spent 20 minutes deciding between 2 nearly identical blue button-down shirts before Lily walked into his bedroom and pointed at the one on the left. "That one," she said. "Why that one?" "Because it's the one Victoria likes." "How do you know which one Victoria likes?" "Because she told me." "When?" "When you wore the other one last week and she made a face." Ryan put on the one on the left. The flight was 3 hours and 40 minutes. Lily had never been on a plane before, and she spent the first hour pressed against the window, narrating everything she saw with the breathless intensity of a nature documentary. "That's a cloud. That's another cloud. That one looks like Gerald. Daddy, do you think Gerald can see us from down there?" "Gerald is a caterpillar, Lily. He can't see the sky." "He's a butterfly now. Mrs. Henderson said he emerged on Tuesday." "Then maybe he can." Victoria sat in the aisle seat with her laptop open, but she wasn't working. She was staring at a blank email draft she'd started 40 minutes ago and hadn't typed a word into. Ryan noticed. He reached across Lily's seat and tapped the edge of the laptop screen. "Close it," he said. "I'm working." "You're staring at nothing." "That's part of my process." "Your process involves a blank screen and shallow breathing?" She closed the laptop. "I'm nervous," she said. "I know. The last time I brought someone to my parents' house, it was a man named Jeffrey who worked in mergers and acquisitions and wore loafers without socks. My mother loved him. My father tolerated him. He cheated on me with his paralegal 4 months later." "I don't own loafers." "That's not the point." "I know. The point is you're scared that bringing us there makes it real in a way you can't undo." She looked at him. "When did you get so good at that?" "At what?" "Saying the thing I'm thinking before I figure out how to say it." "I'm an engineer. Pattern recognition." "That's not engineering. That's emotional intelligence." "Don't tell my coworkers. They think I'm a robot." Victoria smiled, the real kind, the kind that started in her eyes, and closed the laptop fully and put it in the bag under her seat. She leaned back and closed her eyes, and Ryan watched her face relax by degrees, the tension leaving her jaw first, then her forehead, then the tight line of her shoulders. He wondered if she knew how different she looked when she stopped holding herself together. Younger, softer, more like the woman who sat on his kitchen floor on Christmas morning in borrowed pajamas than the one who ran board meetings in heels. He wondered if she knew that the version of her he loved most was the one she considered the least impressive. Richard and Catherine picked them up at the airport. This was surprising. Victoria had expected a car service, the way her parents had always handled airport logistics, with a driver holding a sign in the arrivals area and a black sedan idling at the curb. Instead, Richard was standing at baggage claim in a wool overcoat, and Catherine was beside him holding a small stuffed elephant. "That's for Lily," Catherine said, handing it over before anyone said hello. "I saw it at a shop in town and thought of her." Lily took the elephant, examined it with the seriousness of an appraiser, and said, "His name is Theodore." "Excellent choice," Catherine said. Richard shook Ryan's hand. The grip was the same, firm, held one beat, but the energy behind it was different, not evaluating, welcoming. The difference was small, but Ryan felt it in his whole body. "Good flight?" Richard asked. Lily narrated the entire cloud system over Pennsylvania. "Good, a child who notices things." They drove to Greenwich in Richard's car, a dark blue sedan that was expensive but not ostentatious, the kind of car a wealthy man buys when he wants quality without making a statement about it. The house was on a tree-lined street 15 minutes from downtown, set back from the road behind a stone wall and a wrought iron gate that opened with a remote on the visor. It was large, larger than Ryan had imagined, though he'd known it would be large, with white clapboard and black shutters and a front door painted dark red. Lily pressed her face against the car window. "Is this a hotel?" "It's a house," Ryan said. "Whose house?" "Victoria's parents' house." Lily looked at Victoria. "You grew up here?" "I did." "It's really big." "It is." "Does it have a swimming pool?" Victoria glanced at her mother. Catherine, without turning around, said, "Heated, and there are towels in the guest bathroom." Lily's eyes went wide. Ryan gave Victoria a look that said, "We are never going to get her to leave." The house inside was exactly what Ryan had expected, and nothing like it at the same time. It was elegant, polished floors, high ceilings, furniture that looked like it had been chosen by someone with a degree in looking expensive. But it was also lived in ways that surprised him. A stack of magazines on the coffee table that hadn't been straightened, a pair of reading glasses left on the kitchen counter, a scratch on the hardwood near the back door that looked like it had been made by a dog, though he didn't see one. "We had a retriever," Catherine said, noticing him looking at the scratch. "Oliver. He passed last spring." "I'm sorry." "He was 14. He had a good life." She paused. "He would have liked Lily. He was very patient with children." They had dinner at the long table in the dining room. Catherine had cooked. This was the second surprise of the evening, because Victoria had told Ryan her mother hadn't cooked regularly in 20 years. But the table was set with dishes Catherine had made herself: roasted chicken, potatoes, a salad that was simple and good, and a chocolate cake that sat on the counter like a promise. "Mom," Victoria said, standing in the kitchen doorway. "You cooked?" "Don't sound so shocked. I'm capable." "I'm not shocked. I'm touched." Catherine turned from the stove. She looked at her daughter, really looked the way she had at the brunch in Portland, with that same searching expression, and said, "I wanted it to feel like home, not a performance, not a production, just dinner." Victoria's eyes went bright. She nodded once, quickly, and turned away before the emotion could fully surface. Ryan, standing behind her in the hallway, put his hand on the small of her back. She leaned into it for half a second, then straightened and walked into the dining room. Dinner was not a production. It was loud and messy and human in ways that Victoria had never experienced at this table before. Lily talked non-stop about Gerald the butterfly, about Theodore the new elephant, about the swimming pool she had already mentally claimed as her personal property. Richard listened to every word with the focused attention of a man who had apparently decided that this 6-year-old was the most interesting conversationalist in the room. "Do you like swimming?" he asked Lily. "I love swimming. Daddy takes me to the pool on Saturdays. I can almost do a flip." "Almost." "I get halfway and then I panic." "That's honest." "Daddy says honesty is important even when it's embarrassing." Richard looked at Ryan across the table. Something passed between them. Not a look exactly, but an understanding. The recognition of a man who raised his children with a principle and a man who respected that principle. Richard nodded once. Ryan nodded back. After dinner, while Lily was in the living room showing Catherine her drawings on a tablet Victoria had loaded with photos, Richard asked Ryan to step outside. They stood on the back patio, stone pavers, a view of a lawn that was brown and dormant in the January cold, a sky that was clear and dark and full of stars that Ryan couldn't see in Portland. Richard handed him a glass of scotch. The good kind, probably. Ryan didn't know enough about scotch to tell the difference, but the glass was heavy, and the liquid was amber, and it burned in a way that suggested expense. "I want to be direct with you," Richard said. "I'd prefer that. My daughter told us the truth, about the arrangement, the fake relationship, all of it. I know. I wasn't happy about it, not because she lied. People lie when they're cornered, and I've done enough in business to understand that impulse. I was unhappy because she felt cornered by us, by her mother and me. That's a failure I have to own." Ryan sipped the scotch and said nothing. He understood that Richard wasn't looking for absolution. He was looking for a witness. "Catherine and I pushed her," Richard continued. "Not deliberately, or maybe deliberately, but without malice. We wanted things for her that we thought were right. Marriage, family. The things that gave our lives structure. We didn't consider that her structure might look different from ours. Most parents don't. Most parents should." Richard turned his glass in his hands. "I've been successful in my career. I built something. Catherine built something. And we raised 2 children who are, by most measures, accomplished and capable. But accomplishment and capability don't mean someone is happy. Andrew checks every box we ever set for him, and I'm not sure he's happy either. I think he's just compliant. And Victoria burned every box we set for her and built her own. And she's been exhausted and lonely for years. And I didn't see it because I was too busy being proud of the boxes she was building." He looked at Ryan. "She's not exhausted anymore. She's not lonely. I saw that the first time we came to Portland, before I knew the relationship was fake. Something about her was different, lighter. And I thought it was the man, you, but it wasn't. Not entirely. It was the life, the small apartment, the kid with the drawings, the chaos of it. She was lighter because for the first time since she was a child, she was living inside something that wasn't optimized for performance." Ryan felt the weight of the man's words settle into him. He stood there on the cold patio with expensive scotch in a heavy glass, and he thought about the apartment on Belmont Street, the cracked faucet, the buzzing hallway light, the sagging couch with the coffee-stained blanket. And he understood what Richard was saying, that sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer someone isn't something you build or achieve. It's something you already have, something you were too busy undervaluing to recognize as rare. I don't have much to offer her, Ryan said. Not by your standards. My standards were wrong. Maybe, but the gap is real. She runs a company. I calculate load distributions. She negotiates with boards. I argue with contractors about rebar. When she's in a room, people pay attention because she's built something impressive. When I'm in a room, people don't notice. And that's fine, because my job is to make sure the room doesn't collapse. And yet she chose your room. Ryan was quiet for a moment. The scotch was warm in his chest. Yeah, he said. She did. Then stop measuring yourself against a yardstick she's already thrown away. Richard drained his glass. He looked at the dark lawn, the bare trees, the sky above Greenwich that was the same sky above Portland, but felt entirely different. I don't need you to be wealthy, Richard said. I don't need you to be impressive. I need you to be the man I watched handle his ex-girlfriend at a dinner table without losing his composure. The man who raises a daughter, who knocks on strangers' doors with drawings. The man who agreed to a ridiculous fake boyfriend scheme because a woman he barely knew was scared and needed help. That man is enough. More than enough. Ryan felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been knotted since long before Victoria moved into his apartment, since before Sabrina left, maybe since the day his parents died and he started carrying the weight of being everything to everyone without anyone telling him he was doing it well. Thank you, Richard. Don't thank me. Just don't break her heart. I won't. And fix that faucet. Victoria mentioned it drips. It's on my list. They went back inside. Catherine had put Lily to bed in the guest room. Or rather, Lily had put herself to bed by falling asleep on the living room couch, clutching Theodore the elephant, and Catherine had carried her upstairs with a tenderness that surprised no one more than Catherine herself. Ryan found Victoria in the kitchen, washing dishes. She was standing at the sink with her sleeves rolled up, her hands in soapy water, doing something so ordinary and so unlike the CEO version of herself that it made him stop in the doorway and just look at her. How was the patio conversation? She asked, without turning around. Your dad gave me scotch and told me not to break your heart. What did you say? I said I wouldn't. Can you keep that promise? I don't know. Nobody can promise that for sure, but I can promise to try harder than I've ever tried at anything. She turned off the water and dried her hands on a towel. She turned to face him, leaning back against the counter, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. Ryan. Yeah? I resigned from the board today. He blinked. What? Not from the company, from the board. I'm stepping down as CEO and moving to a chief creative officer role. Marcus is taking over operations. Priya is handling the San Francisco office. I'll still be involved, but I'm not running it day to day anymore. When did you decide this? 3 weeks ago. After the holiday concert I almost missed, after Lily's collage, after I spent Christmas morning on a couch in borrowed pajamas and realized I was happier in that moment than I'd been in a decade of board meetings and product launches and investor dinners. She unfolded her arms and pressed her palms against the counter behind her. I built Hale and Gray because I needed to prove something. To my parents, to myself, to every person who ever looked at me and saw a rich man's daughter playing at business. And I proved it. The company is successful. The brand is respected. The revenue is strong. And I'm tired, Ryan. I'm so tired of running toward a finish line that keeps moving. Every quarter, new targets. Every year, new goals. Every milestone, another one behind it. I woke up one morning last month and realized I'd been sprinting for 8 years, and I couldn't remember why I started. What do you want instead? I want to be in the hallway when Lily comes out of her classroom. I want to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, even though I've never made them, and they'll probably be terrible. I want to sit on your awful couch and watch movies Lily picks out and fall asleep before the ending. I want a life that's measured in moments instead of metrics. My couch isn't awful. Your couch is a crime against furniture. It has character. It has structural failure. He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her, close. Close enough to see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes that she'd gotten from years of squinting at screens, close enough to smell the dish soap on her hands. I need to tell you something, he said. Okay. For 2 years, I've been telling myself that my life was small, that the apartment was small, and my job was small, and my world was small. And that was okay because small was safe and safe was enough. And then you moved in and my life didn't get bigger. My apartment is still small. My job is still unglamorous. My daughter still needs sandwich bags in her shoes when it rains. She needs new shoes. She needs new shoes. But the point is, my life didn't get bigger. I just stopped seeing it as small. Because you showed up and you looked at everything I had. The apartment, the routine, the meatloaf, and the pancakes, and the crayon drawings. And you chose it. Not because you didn't have other options. You had every option. You had San Francisco and board meetings, and men named Jeffrey who wear loafers without socks. And you chose this. Victoria's eyes were bright. Her chin was doing the thing Catherine's chin had done on the phone. The shaking thing. The thing that happens when someone is trying very hard not to cry, and the effort is visible in every muscle. I chose this, she said, and that changed how I see it. Not because I needed your validation, because seeing someone value the life you built makes you realize it was valuable all along. I wasn't small. I was just looking at myself through the wrong person's eyes. She reached up and put her hands on his face. Her palms were still slightly damp from the dishes. Her fingers were warm. She held his face the way her mother had held hers in the Portland apartment, gently, firmly, with the focused attention of someone who is memorizing what they're looking at. I love you, she said. Not the version of you that Sabrina wanted, not a version I'm going to try to upgrade or improve. You. The guy with the sandwich bags and the load calculations and the terrible couch. You keep insulting my couch. Your couch deserves it. He kissed her. In her parents' kitchen, with dish soap on her fingers and scotch on his breath, and a 6-year-old sleeping upstairs with a stuffed elephant named Theodore. It was not a cinematic kiss. It was clumsy and slightly off-center, and he bumped her nose and they both laughed into it, and it was the best kiss of his life because it was real. Completely, imperfectly, undeniably real. They flew back to Portland on Monday. Lily slept through the entire flight, Theodore tucked under one arm and her head on Victoria's shoulder. Ryan sat in the window seat and looked out at the clouds, the same clouds Lily had narrated on the way east, and thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, the man who wrapped sandwich bags around his daughter's shoes and fell asleep on the couch with half a beer and called himself functional. That man was still here, still tired, still imperfect, still doing his best with what he had, but that man was no longer alone, and that made all the difference. They landed in Portland at 4 p.m. The rain was waiting for them, cold, persistent, exactly as ugly as it had been the morning this whole thing started. They caught a cab to Belmont Street. Ryan carried the suitcases. Victoria carried Lily, who woke up in the elevator, working again, miraculously, and asked if they could have pancakes for dinner. It's 4:30, Ryan said. So? Pancakes are breakfast. Pancakes are whenever you want them to be, Daddy. He looked at Victoria. She shrugged. She makes a compelling argument. They made pancakes, all 3 of them in the small kitchen, bumping elbows and arguing about chocolate chips and getting batter on the counter. Lily stood on a step stool and stirred with the concentration of a surgeon. Victoria read the recipe off her phone and added too much milk and didn't apologize for it. Ryan manned the stove and flipped pancakes that were uneven and slightly burnt on one side and exactly right. They ate at the kitchen table, the same table where Victoria had asked Ryan to pretend to be her boyfriend, the same table where they'd stayed up until 2 a.m. learning each other's lives, the same table where Ryan had told her that people can stretch but can't become someone else, and Victoria had told him about panic attacks on bathroom floors, and both of them had discovered that loneliness has the same architecture no matter how different the buildings look from the outside. After dinner, after Lily was in bed with Theodore and a new drawing she'd started of the Greenwich house, complete with a swimming pool that took up half the page, Ryan and Victoria sat on the couch. The terrible couch. The one with the coffee stain and the sagging cushions and the structural failure that Victoria had correctly diagnosed months ago. Victoria leaned against his side. He put his arm around her. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator and the rain and the faint sound of Lily talking to Theodore in her room. A conversation about whether elephants could swim, which Lily had decided they could. Ryan? Yeah? I think we need a new couch. I know. And a new faucet. I know. And eventually maybe a bigger apartment. Eventually. But not yet. No. Not yet. She pressed closer. He held on. And in the small apartment on Southeast Belmont Street, with its cracked faucet and its buzzing hallway light, and its refrigerator that hummed like it was singing to itself, two people who had found each other through a lie sat in the truth of what they'd built and didn't need it to be anything other than what it was. The life Ryan Carter once considered small and ordinary had become the foundation for something he never thought he deserved. A love that didn't ask him to become someone else. A family that grew not from obligation but from choice. And a home that was measured not by its square footage or its property value, but by the number of crayon drawings on the refrigerator and the sound of a 6-year-old's laughter echoing down a narrow hallway. Victoria Hale, who had spent 8 years building an empire to prove she was enough, finally discovered that the safest place she had ever known was not inside a glass-walled office or a Greenwich estate or any of the impressive structures she had constructed to protect herself from the world. It was inside a 2-bedroom apartment with a lopsided Christmas tree and a determined paper angel and a man who had never once asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was. And that is the thing about love. The real kind. The kind that lasts. The kind that people build lives on. It doesn't arrive with thunder. It doesn't announce itself with grand gestures or dramatic declarations or cinematic moments designed to take your breath away. It arrives quietly. Through a knocked door and a crayon drawing. Through a Saturday morning pancake and a borrowed pair of pajamas. Through a kitchen conversation at midnight where two people too tired to perform finally tell each other the truth. It arrives, most often, in the ordinary moments that we're too busy chasing extraordinary ones to notice. And if you're lucky, if you're paying attention, you catch it before it passes. You hold on, not perfectly, not gracefully, but stubbornly, clumsily, with both hands, and a willingness to stay even when staying is harder than leaving. Ryan Carter caught it. Victoria Hale caught it. And a 6-year-old girl with a butterfly headband and a stuffed elephant named Theodore caught it before either of them did. Because children always do. They see what adults spend years trying to figure out. They see love not as a feeling to be analyzed or a problem to be solved, but as a simple, obvious fact. Like clouds being shaped like caterpillars, or purple and green being friends, or pancakes being appropriate at any hour of the day. The rain kept falling on Portland. The faucet kept dripping in the bathroom. And in the small, imperfect apartment on Belmont Street, 3 people who had become a family sat together on a terrible couch and didn't need the world to be anything other than exactly what it was.